Yes, so thank you so much for the detailed introduction. Actually, you cut one of my slides in half. That's good. Yeah. So this presentation is about Microgrid, a new Microgrid that SAS Power is setting up at the remote community of Descharme Lake. It's a new way of providing power to serve our people, the SAS Power customers. Something new we are exploring, but it's well on its way towards implementation. So today, myself and Ryan Jansen from Saskatchewan Research Council are going to present. We'll go over the brief introduction. Actually, we already sort of did that. Thank you, Preston, for that. We will go through what is a microgrid, and why have we chosen Descharme Lake for this particular project, what benefits as SAS Power and the public will see through this microgrid, and how the project is flowing and what are the next steps. So microgrid is basically a self-sufficient energy system. In the simplest definition, it's basically a combination of any kind of energy source: solar panels, wind turbines, diesel gensets. It can be anything, basically a combination of anything, which provides power. It can provide power to a local customer, such as a building or a small community. And at Descharme Lake, the microgrid we are thinking of will look something like as it's shown in the picture. It will have some solar panels. It will have diesel gensets as backup and to provide load when the sun is not shining. And we will have some control systems, and most importantly, the batteries. So Descharme Lake is actually a very remote community in Saskatchewan. If we travel northwest of Prince Albert, it's 600 kilometers from there. It's basically the end of the line, our distribution line. The line doesn't go any further, even though the gravel road does go a little bit further. So from La Loche to Descharme Lake, where the two red arrows are, that's the segment of the distribution line, which we are trying to get rid of, basically. And why we are trying to get rid of, I will explain that in the next few slides. But one way of getting rid of that is by installing a microgrid locally at Descharme Lake to serve that community. So Descharme Lake, if you want to travel from Regina, it's about 10-hour drive, about 1,000 kilometers. It's amazing how big Saskatchewan is. And from Prince Albert, about 600 kilometers, as I mentioned. It's a very small community. The last segment of it, the 100 kilometers, about 96 kilometers, actually gravel road. Up until La Loche, it's actually proper paved road. So if we are on that gravel road, this is what it looks like. You can see the line single. It may be a little bit difficult to see, but you can see the poles on the right side. It has one wire going on it, and that's the line serving this community. It's a single phase 14 kilovolt line, which travels through the bushes on the side of the road for 96 kilometers just to serve that small community. And a lot of maintenance is required, basically, to maintain this line. As you can see, there's about 20-meter wide vegetation management that's required on an ongoing basis every few years, which costs a lot of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Also, the line itself is getting pretty old, as I will show you in some next few slides. So a bit summary, some facts about Descharme Lake. As I mentioned, it's a 96-kilometer line. That line needs to be rebuilt. We estimate that it will cost us about $8 to $10 million to rebuild that line, because that line has poles which are more than 30 years old. Some of them, actually most of them, are installed in 1960s. So when you go up there and replace these poles, and maybe we have to replace half of these poles, but still the veg management is an ongoing cost. You combine all of that together, it's about $8 to $10 million estimated cost, right? So it's an aging infrastructure. So we can either build the line as we have been doing in the past, or we can look at some other alternate solutions, such as a microgrid, which in the past wasn't very feasible because of the high cost of batteries, the development in solar sector. But now it seems all of these things are more practical, more financially, they make sense. The payback is good. So that's why microgrid is something we want to explore. Now, Descharme Lake itself is a very small community. As I mentioned, it only has like 10 houses over there. And when we visited, only 3 of them were occupied, 2 or 3 of them. Very few people, right? But we still have that line to maintain. It's only a 30 kilowatt peak electricity load and generates about 30,000 revenue for SAS Power. Just this 96-kilometer line has about 1,076 foot poles, very old. And as I mentioned, edge management requirements and ongoing maintenance. So we have two options now. Either we can continue the way we did in the past, rebuild the line, on an ongoing basis, keep dealing with the edge management costs, or we can look at some new options such as microgrid, which are financially way less costly and should put downward pressure on the rates. So this is the community in the Descharme Lake. It's a drone shot of the entire community. This is basically the extent of it. This is a conceptual diagram of what we want to achieve over here in the Descharme Lake. So typically you just have, right now the situation is you have the line coming in and serving these buildings. But that dotted area in this drawing is what we want to add to this community, which is the microgrid. Basically, if you see that microgrid has a control unit, it has dedicated energy sources such as the solar panels, the diesel gen sets, and the battery storage system. So all of this combined within the dotted area is the microgrid. That's what we want to add. What we would like to do is install it in place and test it for a year or so to establish the reliability of it. And we are hoping that it will be more reliable than the existing line in place. And if it proves that it is more reliable, then we'll get rid of that line coming into the community. The entire segment of the line, which is 96 kilometers, will be salvaged. So just to zoom in on that microgrid design a little bit more, SAS Power asked SRC to do a feasibility study on the microgrid design. Like, what will it look like? What are the sizing requirements over here? How big of the solar panel system we need? How big the batteries are required to be? What can we do for reliability? That's why we decided like on 2 gen sets in the system. So these are the specs of the microgrid we are going to proceed with. 230 kilowatts of solar, 488 kilowatt hour lithium ion batteries. We will have 2 gen sets. So there's always a backup to the backup, basically, right? So we don't want to have the customers without power in any situation. And the inverter charges about 144 kilowatts. So the initial capital cost of this microgrid to set it up is estimated to be about 1.6 million, which is 1/5 the cost of rebuilding the line, basically. Once this microgrid is set up based on the sizing of these components, 80% of the energy is expected to come from the renewable source, which is the solar, the sunlight, and less than 20% is expected to come from diesel. During those days when there's not enough sunlight, the winter days are very long, there's too much darkness, basically, right? So that bar chart on the right actually shows you the dark section is the energy provided by the diesel genset, which is a small fraction of the year, and the light blue bars are provided by the solar energy. And this system will perform at an emission intensity of about 213 gram per kilowatt hour. So SAS Power right now is way much higher than that because we have coal power plants within our generation mix. That generation mix is going to get cleaner as the coal gets decommissioned by 2030. So at 2030, we will be at about this. The overall system emissions are expected to be around 200 gram per kilowatt hour mark. And that's why we are trying to achieve the same level of emissions with this microgrid. The simple payback, if you compare going ahead with the overhaul of the lines, replacement of the poles versus establishing a microgrid, is basically 1.5 years. A very short payback, very good project, because we will not have to do that wedge management, we will not have to replace the lines and poles, not have to upgrade anything. So here's a summary of the benefits of this microgrid project. So financially, it's a better option. As I mentioned, the community only provides about $20,000 to $30,000 in revenue to SAS Power, and we can either go forward and do what we have been doing in the past, spend millions of dollars to maintain that line, or choose a less costly option, which is microgrid, which has recently become feasible in the last few years, which should put downward pressure on the entire rate base, basically. But who pays for this wedge management and line maintenance? Everybody, because it's embedded in everybody's rate. Everybody who's customer SaaS power, right? So by reducing the amount of money we have to spend on maintaining this line, everybody benefits from it. So greenhouse gas intensity will go down, because even as soon as we set it up, which should be in the next 12 months or so, the greenhouse intensity from this microgrid will be almost half of what SaaS power intensity is right now. There's a lot of issue of wildfire over there. Often, like even when we visited last year, there was a wildfire over there. That's why the veg management is so important, because if the fire comes too close to the line, it can damage the line. So we will not have to deal with that, because we don't have to maintain the line with microgrid. Also, like indigenous folks who live over there, they are very reluctant to allow SaaS power to do veg management through use of herbicides, and that's a valid point. That will not have to be done with a microgrid. So the customer experience should go up too, because we are reaching out to the customers. We are not only establishing a microgrid based on their requirement, we are also doing some other projects over there, such as home efficiency projects. We are looking into reducing their baseline load so the microgrid performs better than expected, better than it's modeled in this presentation. And we are engaging local folks over there. We went there and we explained to them what we are trying to achieve over in their community, and they were very welcoming of this idea. Basically, they were saying, okay, yeah, that's a good idea, all the boxes check. And as I mentioned, this kind of project should reduce the ongoing operating and maintenance cost of the line, and should put downward pressure on the rates, or reduce the upward pressure on the rates, I should say. This is the last slide. So we did a microgrid feasibility study last year. And the outcome of that study was yes. The answer was yes, that we can do this project. It is feasible to install a microgrid. And the sizing, as mentioned in the previous slides, those were the outcome of the design process. Basically, that's what we will proceed with. We are going to acquire the land and complete environmental assessments. We have already figured out a little bit of a patch of land which we require to establish this microgrid. Next, we will procure the microgrid components, the solar panels, the controls, all the things that are required to build this thing up, and start installation around, I would say, fall of this year, hopefully. But our target is to complete this project and the system be up and running by spring of 2024. Once the system is up and running, we would like to monitor this system remotely to verify its performance for a period of at least 1 year. We will be very carefully monitoring up to, I don't know, like 30 parameters to make sure that the system requires less maintenance. It's very reliable and performing as we modeled it, or even better than we modeled it, to make a decision on that line. So the results of that monitoring and verification period will help us decide if we want to decommission that line or not. But the hope is we are confident that we will be able to decommission that line. So yeah, that was the presentation I wanted to share. I think I wanted to show one more picture over here, which I missed before. So the top-down view of this segment of land, this is where we want to put the solar panels and a power system. Basically, this is the entire microgrid. This road is going, the entry into the community, exactly at the entry, we want to put this system up. And the line is coming along the road, which we hope to decommission in a few, maybe in a year or so from decommissioning. Okay, if anyone has any questions, we can answer now.
Fantastic. Thanks, Arslan. Very much appreciate it. And people, anybody watching, feel free to post any questions inside that Q&A function on the right-hand side. I've got a couple of questions ready to go. And considering we're here in Saskatchewan, we have many communities that would be similar to Descharme. I know you had mentioned that Descharme is quite a small population, but how many communities do you foresee could benefit from this type of microgrid?
That's a very good question. And actually, that is the motivation behind doing this project. We want to find more and more opportunities where this makes sense. It's hard to give a number right now, because for every community, we have to redo that study to crunch the numbers to see where it makes financial sense. We have to compare the microgrid with any other existing option. For example, we have found some communities which are growing. The electrical load over there is growing, so we have we can either upgrade the line to increase the capacity of the distribution or the transmission line going into the community, or we can supplement that line with a locally installed microgrid. So you have to run the numbers on both and see which one is more, which one makes better sense financially, and proceed with that one. But already in the past year or so, we have found individual customers who are branched from the main line, maybe a customer 5 kilometers away from the main line and requires heavy veg management. Imagine spending $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 in veg management to provide service to one customer who provides revenue of maybe like $2,000, $3,000 to SaskPower in a given year. So we are finding many of these opportunities, and we are hoping that whether it's a big community, not a big community, a medium-sized community, or an individual customers, we will either be able to have a microgrid solution for them or a nanogrid solution. So nanogrid is basically the same as microgrid, but it serves only one customer. So that's an exercise we want to do during the next couple of years, identify all the other communities which can potentially benefit from this kind of project, and run those financial numbers and see where it makes sense.
Great. We have a question that's come in. So will there be somebody monitoring the solar array? I'm thinking about snow, vegetation, and wildlife that may disrupt the system as well. What are the life costs of the solar panels? Are they recyclable in any way?
Yeah,
that's a very good question, and I will ask Ryan to respond to that.
I finally get to talk. Arslan did a great job that there aren't many questions. It's good. Yes, the short answer is yes. We're going to be doing that in a couple different ways. We are installing kind of remote surveillance throughout the site because we want to maintain a very high degree of reliability. So as part of that, we want to be able to have eyes on site, even if we're not physically on site. We're also going to partner with the community so they can provide ongoing feedback. And if there's any kind of service that's needed, such as, say, brushing off panels or checking on a system, we can accommodate that. And so we have some local participation in this. I think the second question there was with regards to the solar panels. That's a great question. Solar panels are recyclable. The framing is aluminum. There's glass in it. The main point, though, is that often these solar panels, even though they have an end of life typically of about 30 years, that means after 30 years, they're only putting out about 80% of their rated capacity. Just because there's only 80% left, that means if it was a 100-watt panel, you still produce 80 watts. It's already in place. Typically, people just continue operating these. So they are recyclable. However, the goal is to maintain them for as long as they keep producing. And the first solar panels that were developed in the 70s and 80s are still producing power. And so that would be the primary goal, is to maintain longevity first. And then after that, then go through and take them apart and go through the whole recycling process.
Maybe a two-part question here, but Arslan, earlier in the presentation, you had mentioned that the most important part potentially might be the batteries of a microgrid, the battery component to a microgrid. Could you just explain why that is and why they're so important to the grid?
Absolutely. So a microgrid can be a combination of different kind of energy producing sources, right? You may have noticed we don't have, for example, wind in here, right? So wind over here doesn't make sense, right? But we do have diesel, solar, and batteries basically, right? Nothing else, right? So during daytime, of course, we have the sunlight, right? But the sunlight may shine more or go down with the shading if the clouds come forward. You don't want the community to be without power at any given time. So the idea is you charge these batteries with the solar panels, and the batteries provide the power to the community, right? So even if the sun all gets blocked all of a sudden, or there's no sun during nighttime, those batteries are going to provide continuous power to the entire community. You're storing excess power into these batteries and using it whenever the sun is not shining. But in 10% or maybe 10 to 20% of the cases, there will be not enough sun and not enough power within the batteries. That's where the diesel kicks in. And that's why, hence the combination of these three things.
Yeah. I guess a follow-up question to that too, in terms of battery selection, have you made any decisions on that? Lithium ion or testing flow batteries that perform much better in cold conditions and have a longer lifetime?
Thanks for that question. We are looking at some options. We're leaning towards lithium ion, partially because it's a mature and developed technology. I think we have definitely looked at flow batteries. This is probably on the slightly lower end of the range of a flow battery's capacity. We're less than a half megawatt hour of storage. There's also some aspects regarding that cold climate. Often you have to maintain kind of the environment around those flow batteries, which can incur additional costs. So at this point, because we are focused primarily on reliability of the system, going with a more proven technology, but that doesn't mean going forward we can't implement other energy storage technologies.
Has consideration been given to the ways of reducing consumption of electricity within the communities as well?
That's a DSM question. Awesome question. So I work in that group, demand side management, customer solutions group. So we definitely have plans, and actually we have started on it, to look at these houses and the buildings which are over there, right? What kind of equipment is running in these houses, right? We will have to do sort of an audit, go there and basically make a note of what's running and what's not. For example, when we went there, we saw a few exterior lights which were on all the time, right? Even though they were not required, the sun was shining and there was nobody home, right? So this kind of wastage we want to eliminate. Maybe put a daylight sensor on these lights. Maybe look at any inefficient appliance inside the house and try to replace it. Maybe it's a refrigerator or some kind of a heating device, if possible. And so basically we want to reduce the base load so the microgrid overperforms. And by overperform, I mean the greenhouse intensity factor is even lower than what's modeled over here. The diesel gensets kick in even less than when we anticipate them to kick in. Yes, so the demand side solution on the customer side is we are working on it right now.
Okay. And feel free if anybody else has any additional questions, and I can keep rolling here. However, considering in the presentation you had mentioned that this microgrid for Descharme Lake is poised to be in line for 2024. Considering the future power systems modeling that SaskPower is currently doing, how does that fit in?
So this is a very small project. This is only like a 30 kilowatt project. So I know Andrew Monroe presented about a half an hour, maybe 1 hour ago. He was talking about the supply planning option. So on a big scale, on the SaskPower level, decision and planning, this project is not going to make a huge difference, right? This is about testing a new technology which hopefully can be scaled up into any other community, right? It's about making SaskPower more financially efficient. Like there's a running cost to providing service to our customers, right? We want to reduce those costs so that we don't have to increase the rates as much. Otherwise, there's all these small pockets of inefficiencies in our distribution line where we are continuously spending money to maintain these services, right? So that's the idea over here. This is not part of the big supply plan SaskPower has. This is more about, as I mentioned, like finding efficiencies in the system.
Fantastic. I think this flows in a little bit too as well, but what would be the timeline for microgrid adoption in Saskatchewan?
Ryan, you want to say something?
Sure. I mean, this was, I believe, SaskPower's first foray into microgrid implementation. And so that, I guess the short answer is this fall/early spring is the beginning of that. Part of this project is really to prove out that technology. We operate SRC operates some other microgrids, and there's a high reliability associated with them, but this is another kind of scale when you're looking at utility grade microgrids. And so we're putting a lot of extras into these to make sure that we can remotely operate them. We maintain an internet connection all the time. We can have multiple redundancies in case something goes wrong. We can go back to a plan B, C, or D to maintain power to the site. But this is really that demonstration to prove out the technology. And from here, depending on how it goes, and I have full confidence that it's going to be a great project, we'll be able to start looking at other areas in Saskatchewan, and I would term them edge of grid opportunities, where either they're at the end of a line, or perhaps there's maybe a weak grid within the middle or central grid, where you might be able to implement a microgrid to be able to help support reliability and resiliency in the area. So this is really the proving ground to look at how they operate, what are the costs associated, what can you expect from them? And once we have that proven out, I think it'll really serve to provide good business cases to start replicating these across the province where it makes the most sense.
And flowing right into that, and there was a question that came up, is there any plans to consider this or a pilot microgrid in the southern rural community? Thinking about different lived experiences between communities, is that something that we're considering?
Again, it depends upon the situation of that community, right? If it's cheaper for SaskPower to provide electricity to that community with the current infrastructure, which might be running very close to the community, it may be very easy to just pull a line, or probably that community is already powered, right? Now, maybe there's not a lot of veg management that's required over there, things like those. Like, all of these things have to go into the analysis before we can decide if it's a good fit, because microgrid still requires maintenance. There are batteries which require maintenance, the diesel generator require maintenance, right? We just want it to cost less than what exists now, right? So we have to look at the whole scenario on a case-by-case basis to make a financial decision on where it should go, where it's a good fit, and it's not. Also, we have to look at how do we maintain this? Like, who's going to maintain this from within our group? Those are all things we are trying to figure out. Those expertise need to be brought in-house, and dedicated people assigned to monitor the performance and maintain these systems. So I would say it's a case-by-case situation, but as we find more opportunities, we are making a list of these opportunities which need to be analyzed in near future.
Great. And with that, Arslan and Ryan, we very much appreciate your time. To the audience, thank you so much for your engagement today, and recognize that there are more questions, a couple that trickled in, and so we will follow up with more opportunities to learn about and discuss these topics. So if you do think about anything in the after, you can always go to saskpower.com/engage and use the ask a question feature. We have people monitoring that frequently, and happy to answer any questions that do arise, and you can put forward on that platform. So thanks again to everybody for taking the time today to participate in today's Power Talk event. Watch your inbox for the feedback survey. We'd love to hear about your experience. You can also return to the replay area again on the platform to watch anything that you missed or couldn't attend. It'll be active for 2 weeks. Thank you again, everybody, and have a fantastic afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.